Welcome to the Putback on SNY.TV. I'm Ian Begley, SNY's NBA insider, and we are here to break things down in Knicks and across the NBA for the next half hour or so. I have two great guests with me today. We've got from The Athletic, Knicks beat writer, does a great job, James Edwards. I'm sure you've read his coverage. If you haven't seen it, go subscribe to The Athletic to take a look. And we have Andrew Salop, 10-year pro, host of the Combos Court show, Combos Court podcast. You can find that on social media. That's always a fun one for me to take a look at. And as always, we're going to get started here with the baseline. Knicks, Cavs. Last night, the score was very lopsided, and you might look at the score and say, hey, this is another instance of the Knicks getting their doors blown off by a top team in the East. I didn't see it that way, only because they had a lead, I think, 15-point lead. So they were playing well early. They were down 4 rotation players, and it was the second night of a back-to-back. Nonetheless, they are 0-6 against the Cavs and the Celtics this year. James, you were in Cleveland. I'm wondering, how do you contextualize that loss, and what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, it's fair to, as Tibbs always says, you have to look at what's going around the game. And the Knicks are without 3 guards, one of them being their best player in Jalen Brunson. They were without Mitchell Robinson, and it was the second night of a back-to-back. And the Cavs, I think, had been off since Saturday. So that's one way to look at it, and obviously deserves a lot of credence. But there's also they were up 15 points and showed capable of playing to that level and playing to a level that I think would very much put a fear into the Cavaliers, and that didn't happen as the second half played out. So you could say I thought there were a lot of kind of mental lapses late in the game. I didn't love some of the shot selection in the third quarter. I thought they were forcing the issue, not enough ball movement. Defensively, I thought guys were falling asleep a little bit on the backside. So a lot of that stuff plays into the tired mind, tired legs, but they did show capable of playing with the Cavaliers for 24 minutes.
Andrew, for you, how much would you factor in fatigue in that situation for that Knicks team?
Yeah, we've seen this story before. It's classic back-to-back. You know, a team could come out strong, but then they start lagging there in the second half. The X factor all season has been Mikal Bridges, and he just didn't show up, didn't even get shots up. I think shot 6 shots this game. So that was a big X factor. He's always an X factor. And then Cat was an issue. Cat was also, he seemed lagging. And then I didn't like the way he was looking, moving around the court. His leg looked not to be right. And it almost reminded me of Joel Embiid versus the Knicks last year in the playoffs when, yeah, he could get his stats, but he didn't look like he was moving the way he should. And I'm concerned about him at this point.
That's interesting. James, is anything being said about the knee? Obviously, he's being listed on the injury report, but he played. He didn't play the other night against Philly. What's he saying about his knee?
Yeah, I mean, I think to quote Cat, it is what it is. He's a guy that has had knee issues in the past. I think him missing the other day was precautionary, right? I think they do want to make sure they're taking care of him when they can. He hasn't said anything that would kind of ring the alarm bells that would perk the ears. But I mean, it's the end of the season. He is a guy who has had lower body stuff in the past. He is a big guy. So I imagine it's not 100%, but nothing that he's brought to our attention that would suggest that it's anything too serious.
I think this team, like all teams, will definitely benefit from that week between the end of the regular season and the postseason, while the other teams are in that play-in tournament. These guys, I think, will soak in the rest at that point. But big picture, Andrew, I mean, 0-6 is 0-6. That's where they are against the Cavs and the Celtics. They do have one game against each left on the schedule. But based on what you've seen, including last night, I mean, what do you think about how they have performed against these teams, and what does it say to you?
The scarier thing is the point differential, because they're averaging about 20 points per game on losses to these two teams. And then, you know, everybody points at Mitch for the Celtics that, you know, he could make a difference. But I feel like if Porzingis is healthy with 5-out offense, it's going to be really tough to beat a healthy Celtics team. And this Cleveland Cavaliers team, you know, they call them Wingstop, and they have been better without Jalen Brunson, but they just struggle to guard the dynamic guard play of Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland. I feel like those two guys, they guard wings really well. They could guard up really well. But when you're looking at it against these speedy guards, it's been absolutely trouble. And the Cavs just hit a whole totally different gear last night in that second half. We just saw that there's levels to basketball, and this team is just at a different level. Even as you said, Ian, with the four rotation players not in, I don't even think with them they could beat this team in a 7-game series.
Right. I mean, yeah, you had Anunoby, you had Bridges, you had Hart. James, what did you make of the way they defended Donovan Mitchell?
Yeah, I think Andrew makes a great point. I think part of the reason in getting Mikal Bridges for as elite of a defender as OG Anunoby is, I think the team identified that he is better on bigger guards and wings. And so getting Mikal was part of the goal was to have him guard the point of attack. And he's had really good moments this year. He's struggled at times this year, and he's toggled between both this year. But Donovan Mitchell, I just think the Cleveland Cavaliers in totality, and Donovan just being the head of the snake, they play so fast. They get up shots so quick, and it's just kind of the antithesis of the New York Knicks, who don't play very fast. They often draw out the shot clock. I think a lot of that is proxy of just like personnel too. So, and I've talked about that a bunch, but I think Cleveland is just a team that across the board, quick triggers. They shoot it with great accuracy. They play fast. They get possessions. And then defensively, when you're trying to score on them, it's a chore because Donovan has really improved as a defender this year. And then you have the two Twin Towers in the back. Like, to me, it's more of a matchup thing than an individual thing. They kind of are the antithesis of one another.
I want to know, Andrew, about Mitchell Robinson. You know, he's been off, I think, 10 months he missed after that surgery, working his way back. Just as a player at that level, like when you're off for 10 months and you're rehabbing, what is it like shaking off the rust from that amount of time away?
Yeah, I know. I've had 2 knee surgeries, so I'm actually really impressed about the way that Mitch is moving and Mitch is playing at this point. I don't think he should play back-to-backs, and I think that, you know, he makes this team a lot better, as I said, but all season, like, they've been talking about Mitchell Robinson like it's Patrick Ewing coming back or something. And I don't know if he makes that much of an impact against these teams like the Celtics and the Cleveland Cavaliers. But I do have to give him his credit because coming off a knee surgery, it's not easy. And I think he's been great so far for the kind of surgeries he's dealt with throughout the course of his career.
Yeah, that was a major one. It was the foot ankle, but the point remains, it was a big one. Yeah. And he's talked about, he was joking around the other night. We were asking him, you know, what do you need to see to let yourself know that you're in good shape conditioning wise? He's like, I need to play more than 7 minutes straight. So he's got some work to do to get to where he was pre-injury in terms of his conditioning. I think you're seeing the timing come. But the thing to me, James, when I think about his minutes and the back-to-back stuff, like, how many minutes are they going to need from Mitchell Robinson? 20, 25 minutes? I mean, you sub for Cat and then maybe have some minutes with Cat. I don't see them needing more than that amount of time from him. I mean, do you see it differently?
No, I agree with you. And I also think that if there's any concern about Mitch not being able to play back-to-backs, it's like, well, it's the end of the season. I think they have one back-to-back left? Is it this Atlanta-Phoenix? And maybe one more after that, but I think this –
Yeah, 2, I think.
Oh, is it 2? Okay, so playoffs, there's a day off between games, 2 days off between games. I don't think it's that big of a concern, and I don't think we're going to see like Mitch sitting out in game 2 or 3 because they don't think he can play 2 playoff games in a row. Like there's going to be gaps, there's going to be breaks, but I agree with you. I think they can get to 2024. I think ultimately, like I know defensively they are better with Mitch, but they're going to have their best 5 players on the floor when it matters. And whether that's obviously Jalen, Cat, Mikal, OG, and Josh, like those are the names that we acknowledge. It would be very surprising in close games if they end with somebody else other than those 5. But I mean, Tibbs is doing offense for defense, so you could see that as the playoffs kind of play out. But I don't think it's that much of a concern. I think he can get to 2024 once the playoffs come around.
And Andrew, you mentioned OG and Mikal Bridges and how those guys have performed with Jalen Brunson out. I mean, the numbers have been fantastic. They've helped the Knicks, tread water even better than that with Jalen Brunson out. And they've really, I think, taken on that burden on offense and also defending. So to me, they've really looked good. But the thing that I wonder about, and I think it's a fair question and question that's going to be answered at some point is, What happens when Jalen Brunson returns and the shots are not where they are right now? Shot attempts are not where they are right now. Can they still be as effective? Can they make shots at that clip? What's the adjustment like when you have a player coming off an injury who is a significant part of your offense? How is that adjustment? How tough is that adjustment?
I think it makes it even tougher because from the beginning of the season, Tibbs didn't prioritize on-ball reps for Mikal Bridges. And I think that made it tough for him to play with Brunson at times, even though obviously they have great chemistry. We got the Nova Knicks thing coming on. Mikal never felt like he was comfortable until this stretch. I mean, he's had some great games over the course of the season, but this stretch he was the most comfortable outside of last night. And it's going to be interesting to see how Tibbs adjusts when Brunson gets back. So I've liked what I've saw from Mikal so far in Brunson's hiatus, besides last night, of course. But I think a lot of this falls on Tibbs and how we'll implement Brunson back into the lineup, because we all know that Brunson's going to be the guy with the basketball, and it's going to be interesting to see how Mikal adjusts.
Yeah, you bring up a great point about the second unit. Bridges was that guy for, I think, the early portion of the season, maybe, in the second unit, and then Tom kind of went to Cap for a little bit for a stretch, but it wasn't like a consistent thing with Mikal with those the bench guys. And I think I agree with you. I wonder what that would have looked like and how that might have changed, the entire dynamic of the group offensively if Bridges did have those on-ball reps. James, I'm wondering, how do you think about the adjustment here that's going to be made, or needs to be made, once Jalen Brunson returns?
Yeah, I look at OG Anunoby the most, who has just been sensational for about a month here. And I think the biggest thing that people aren't really acknowledging is, yes, OG is being more aggressive. Yes, he's added some tools to his bag in terms of the Euro gathers and getting to the free throw line, which we know Tibbs loves. Defensively, they've been so good and forcing turnovers. He's getting out in transition, still shooting the three ball well. But the big thing to me is the geometry in which he's now playing on the floor. Like, he's in different places with Brunson out than he normally is with Brunson there. And I think that is part of the reason why he's able to take advantage of this, coming from the wing and being able to dribble drive and coming off the DHOs down the pipe. Like, a lot of the stuff we're seeing OG do, he can still do, like get to the rim aggressively, continue with the gathers, continue to shoot well, right? But getting the opportunity helps, but also where he's been at on the court. And I actually think I would like to see him run that second unit, just because I think he's such a tear. Let him have the ball in his hands a little bit more. I'm not saying initiate the offense, but be able to kind of be in these spaces and places where he's been without Brunson to help kind of unlock him. Because I think with the way he defends and the way he's getting to the hole, I mean, I think the case could be made he's maybe been the second best player on the team this year when you're talking about both sides of the floor.
Yeah, I think without a doubt he is that. And I'm wondering, Andrew, because to me, this is where the human element comes in. And this is where, everybody talks about sacrifice and playing for the greater good and doing whatever it takes to win. But this is where it comes into play, actually, I think, because if you're Mikal Bridges, if you're OG Anunoby, I think obviously you like having the ball. You like the way you're playing offensively recently, and then there's going to be an adjustment. I don't know how big the adjustment is going to be, but to me, it's can you maintain that edge, maintain the full buy-in, knowing your shots are going to go down a little bit, knowing you're not going to have the ball in your hands as much. And so, we talk a lot about sacrifice. Athletes talk a lot about sacrifice, but this to me is where the rubber hits the road, so to speak, and where you're really going to be able to see if that buy-in is there. And it's in fairness to those two guys, it's Jalen Brunson as well, who's got to buy in, and I feel like he is fully bought into whatever they want to do. But I'm wondering, Andrew, am I off there? I mean, how do you see like that human element of not getting the amount of shots you were getting 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, I think a lot of this falls on Tibbs, as I said, and Jalen Brunson to make sure that he makes OG and Mikal comfortable and maybe shift the offense slightly and let Mikal get some on-ball reps and OG get some more on-ball reps. He also needs to do that because we know in the playoffs, they're going to have two liabilities on defense because the Knicks, the best version of themselves, are Cat and Jalen Brunson on the floor. So you want OG and Mikal to be comfortable so they're comfortable on both sides of the floor and they have more energy on the defensive side. So it's going to be really interesting to see how Tibbs adjusts. I honestly think Tibbs is on the hot seat, but if he could figure out if he could figure this all out, I think he could save himself a little bit here.
Yeah, he's in the beginning of that extension, but you're always a couple losses, a bad playoff series away from being on that hot seat. So
Yeah.
it sounds a little far-fetched, but Andrew, you know the sport, you know the industry, and you know how quickly things can turn. James, for you, like, what do you think about that idea that, guys actually have to, be mentally prepared to have fewer shots and be okay with that and kind of be for the greater good? And I see that as a challenge with some players. I'm not saying specifically with Bridges or Anunoby, but generally, it's not the easiest thing to do.
Oh, I agree. I think one, just the big part is how does it impact your defense, right? Like, not only do missing shots can they impact how locked in you are in defense, but not getting shots can impact how locked in you are in defense. And I think there's been times this year while OG is one of the best defenders in basketball and Mikal is a really good defender. Like, I don't think they've had stretches where they've been great all year defensively, right? Like, and there's been times where those correlate with kind of lower shots. And not to say that that is a subconscious thing on their part, but I think that's just natural, natural human element. I think that the way that they're going to have to play is they're going to have to balance things. I think Jalen is going to have to continue to kind of build on what has been built while he's been gone. But I also think it's important to remember, like, the best version of this team is Jalen Brunson with the basketball and him making the right reads. I think, kind of like Andrew said, sprinkle in some stuff for OG, sprinkle in some stuff for Mikal. But I certainly think with the way OG is playing, getting to the free throw line, that is such a big priority for Tibbs. And while Mikal he's struggled the last two games, has had some solid performances where his shots come from don't necessarily don't really, what's the word I'm looking for?
Like, they don't have to change much to get him.
Yeah, I think for him, like, he's getting to the same spots he gets to with or without Brunson. Is just more of them. But I think OG's being able to get deep paint touches, get free throws, like, I think that helps the team more than the mid-range shots and what comes with that. So we'll see how that plays out, but it's certainly something that I think they have to navigate.
Yeah, it's something that I'm keeping an eye on. And also, Landry Shamet, he talked to me last month about just being ready for whatever comes on a given night, knowing that his role is going to fluctuate. Some nights, maybe he shoots 5 threes. Some nights he shoots 1 3 and he's more defensive minded. But he said that he's fully accepting of that. He's not fighting against it. I think that that's helped him in this role. And what you're seeing lately from him is he's had some good scoring games recently. So, Andrew, I'm wondering for you, what's the challenge there? Not having a consistent role, not knowing night in, night out what's going to be asked of you, and also your thoughts on the Knicks bench in general.
Well, depth has always been the issue with this team, but for Landry, it was nice to see him step up against the team that drafted him, which that team is a disaster at this point, but which is a whole other topic. But it was good to see him get loose, and hopefully, Landry has always been known to be a 3-and-D guy, and when the three is working and when he's locked in defensively, he could be a really valuable NBA player, even though he's been somewhat of a journeyman. So he's going to be needed in the playoffs, and we all know that depth has been an issue. It was one of the big X factors for this team. So it's tough to stay ready like that when you're not always getting consistent minutes and you have so many offensive options on your team. But it was nice to see him get going there, and hopefully he can continue it through when it comes to these playoffs.
James, you had an interesting thought on Twitter last night about Delon Wright and how he'd been impacting the game in a positive way in his role here. And does Tom Thibodeau have to think about fitting him into the rotation when everyone's back? What are your thoughts there? I mean, is that possible? Anything's possible, obviously, but if everyone's healthy, is it possible to make that switch with one of the guards coming off the bench? And you think Thibodeau is thinking about that?
So I asked Tom last night after the game with the way Delon is playing and him being not necessarily having the most gaudy numbers, but being, I feel like, a steady hand. He's getting deep paint touches nearly every time he drives to the rim. He's obviously known as a defender. Like, those are things that Tom really prioritizes. So I asked him, obviously Delon has gotten an opportunity with all these guards out. Do you anticipate having to find time for him even when they do come back? And you've obviously been around Tom longer than I, but I interpreted him saying, well, you always have to have a rotation. You're setting your rotation, and he thinks it's important to keep that. So I walked away with that meaning, no, I don't think Delon does, but that also could be code for him not wanting to show his hand. So I feel like usually when he mentions you have a rotation and you stick to it, that means he's going to continue to roll with the guys he has. but he did not give an answer either way. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously, I think Campaign has had a really good season. He's a guy that can score in bunches. But I wonder, come playoff time, with what Delon has shown, just being a steady hand, getting guys involved, and again, deep paint touches is so huge for Tibbs. And the way he defends, I wondered if he would prioritize that a little bit. And not to say Cam hasn't been good defensively, I think he really does compete on that end. But is he making shots? Is he not making shots? So I'm very curious to see what Tom does. But I didn't get the sense that he was going to shake things up when those guys get back. But you never know.
Could be maybe a mid-series adjustment that you see.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because like you, I'd be surprised if he shook things up game one of the postseason in terms of the rotation, but it's something you can go to if needed over the course of a series. Guys, let's get right now to the rumor mill. The mill is churning, as it always is. ESPN reporting with Kevin Durant situation that there was mutual interest at the trade deadline between Durant and the Knicks. And listen, I'm sure the Knicks had a degree of interest on getting Kevin Durant. Would they be all in on making the necessary trade to go out and get him and then extend him? It depends on what happens in the postseason, to me, with this team in particular, because they're built to win. If you flame out in the postseason, there's going to be changes, or at least serious conversations about changes. And to me, that starts with, the roster, and you're looking all over the league. I mean, Giannis Antetokounmpo, if he were to become available, I'm sure the Knicks, if they flame out in the postseason, would be aggressive there. Durant, too. It just depends on what happens in the playoffs. I think if this team shows you enough in the second round and gives you reason to believe going into next year, the Knicks are not in those conversations. But certainly things go sideways, I think they will be there. But on Durant specifically, I mean, I know Dallas was very aggressive right before the trade deadline, and I know Miami was hoping to get something done with the Jimmy Butler deal, getting Durant back. So I would assume that those teams had some knowledge about Durant's desire to be there long term, and they were willing to pull the trigger. So I think teams like that are also ones to watch. Andrew, that would be a huge shakeup, right? Trading for Kevin Durant, you got to send out obviously a lot of salary. So you're looking at Anunoby, Bridges, or Karl Anthony Towns, one of those three. I mean, your thoughts on the way this team is going right now, having a huge shakeup move like that with the group.
So when Kevin Durant went to the Suns, I didn't like it because of the redundancy and skill set of their top three players: Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, and Kevin Durant. I do have to say, I like the star fit with Brunson, with Cat, and with Kevin Durant. So if you could make a trade for a top 10 player, I would do it. I know depth has always been an issue, but if you could bring Kevin Durant in, and I know he said at one point it wasn't cool to play in New York anymore, but the Knicks fans, they have to forgive him. They have to let that go. If you could bring in Kevin Durant and keep your top two guys, I would do it.
Yeah, James. I mean, what are your thoughts on the idea that if things go sideways, that's where you try to go?
Yeah, so I had heard that there was somewhat serious discussions about Kevin Durant about the trade deadline between the two teams, more so than in terms of seriousness than some of the other guys I think they called around about. What I don't necessarily know I didn't hear this in terms of mutual interest. I think the Knicks would very much be interested, but I think people forget when Kevin Durant was a free agent that I think ESPN reported that the Knicks weren't interested in offering Kevin Durant a max salary because of his Achilles, and it sounds like something that obviously came from that side of things. So I can't imagine that things are necessarily sitting well with Kevin Durant in New York, but maybe that is the case. Maybe things have changed. Maybe conversations happen. But I go back to this. I think I get a sense that the Knicks are big fish hunting. And I think that is why them missing out last year, I think, is how we got to Mikal and Cat. Do I think that it's possible for them, if a big name comes available, that they package two guys together to go get one? I do think that is possible. Do I think that is wise? I do not, because this team's biggest issues are depth and defense. And yes, I think if you can add Giannis, great. Giannis is a great defender. But like you're going to have to trade 2 or 3 good players to get him, and you're going to have to match salaries because you're over the apron. Are you going to be able to build out the depth? I keep going back to this team rushing when I don't think it needed to, using all of its assets to get Mikal and then the rest to get Cat. Nothing against those players at all. Like they're very good players. But I almost think if their goal is to build the best team possible, they have to kind of ride this out and hope that they can hit on some bench pieces. Because trading 2 of them to get a big name, I don't know if that really solves anything. But if they just want a big fish hunt and bring a big name to the city, that would not surprise me.
Yeah, I agree with you, James. I do think that if that big fish is out there, they will have interest. Again, depending on what happens in the postseason, that's going to factor in for so many teams in terms of what they do in the offseason. I think if this group shows you enough to where you're confident going into next year, the Knicks would not be aggressive in the big fish hunting conversations in the offseason. But if it goes sideways, yeah, I would expect the Knicks to be aggressive in those kinds of conversations. Another name that's kind of popped up, Andrew, is Ja Morant. Ja, from what I had gathered, was not in love with that Memphis egalitarian offense that kind of de-emphasized the pick and roll. And I think it was built by some of those assistants that were let go. And I think that's where some of the rumors around Morant started to surface. It started with that, the idea that he wasn't in love with that offense. Now they're going back to the pick and roll more with their new head coach. And I'm just wondering, based on what you've seen from Memphis, does that look like a totally different offense to you, or do you see some redundancy with that past offense? And I'm asking just because of the Morant situation.
Yeah, I actually thought Morant was on the trade block at one point because of the way they were featuring him. You saw a lot of him in the corner. He didn't have the basketball as much. He wasn't involved in the offense. And then all of a sudden, they surprisingly fire the coach. I was so surprised by that. That was a crazy time to fire the coach. But I don't know, man. I think Ja is a generational talent. And from my perspective, you should never trade a guy like Ja Morant. And I think I have seen a little bit of difference. I know their coach has a European style of play, which is more ball movement, more player movement. And I'm not sure if that fits well with what Ja Morant does. But I do think for Memphis that they should try and figure it out with Ja Morant, because when you have a generational talent like that, I know he's had his things in his past. I know he's had his problems. You try and keep him there in Memphis. And I think Memphis loves him. So I'd love to see it work out there. Ian, are you bringing this up because you've heard Ja Morant Knicks stuff, or is there something going there in that regard?
No, I think at the point guard spot, they're pretty set right now. But,
right.
Brooklyn is definitely going to be aggressive this summer. Yeah. I could see them kind of jumping in if a player like Morant becomes available.
How do you feel about Zion to Brooklyn?
Look, man, the idea is, can he stay healthy? That's the question we've been asking forever with Zion. And if you think you're a team and you think, hey, we have the personnel here, we have the framework to keep him healthy and get the best version of Zion, go for it. I don't. That's such an unanswerable question, though, to me. So I would be a little hesitant in putting together a significant package for Zion. But yeah, I mean, he was playing fantastic. But the health is always a concern there. One thing on Memphis, I mean, one thing I think you could take to the bank is they're going to give Jaren Jackson Jr. that big extension that he's eligible for this offseason. And then you're talking about, they have other free agents they want to bring back. How much can you then spend on this team in terms of the tax and the first apron, second apron? So like every other team, I think they're going to face some financial restrictions, or maybe questions that they're going to have, hard questions they're going to have to answer with these guys and with this group. Anyway, we now are going to get off the rumor mill. We're going to go to what we learned. What we learned, presented by Binghamton University. Binghamton University was named the top school in the SUNY system, according to recent rankings from the Wall Street Journal and Forbes. Visit binghamton.edu for more. Jalen Brunson, finalist for Teammate of the Year. Knicks going 8-6 so far, maybe 8-7, since he has been hurt. He's with the team, James, as I think Tom Thibodeau said that last night. And what I mentioned earlier in the week, the weekend kind of being a natural landing spot given how everything has progressed. I still think, unless he suffers some kind of setback, the weekend will be the landing spot. And if I'm making a total guess, I would guess Sunday over Saturday. But we'll see how he does in practice on Friday. But it seems like he's making good progress. James, how do you see it?
Yeah, I think so too. Been around him the last few days. Seems to be in good spirits. Obviously, he's walking, but he looks spry. That's a dude that obviously takes his craft very seriously, and with that, the rehab process and making sure his body's right. He's cleared for basketball activities. When asked by Tibbs, does that mean practice? Tibbs said, I believe that falls under basketball activities. It's been our impression that he's with the team on a pretty not long road trip, but 2 games in 5 days, I believe. So he's here. To me, that's not nothing. Aside from like hearing stuff throughout the last day or so, yeah, I'm pretty confident he's going to practice Friday. More than confident. And whether he plays Saturday or Sunday is a question. And do you bring him back Saturday, and is he able to play back-to-backs? Do you want him to play back-to-backs so he misses the game against front of the home crowd and against Phoenix? Or do you just have him miss against Atlanta and then have him return against Phoenix, and then you have a week right there where you can have to try to build some momentum with your group?
Yeah, you laid it out perfectly, and that's why if I were to guess, I would guess Sunday. Andrew, the rust factor here for Jalen Brunson. It's obvious that whenever you don't play in games, you could do everything possible on the side, but there's no way to create the conditions of an NBA game conditioning-wise. How much rust do you think needs to be knocked off here for Brunson? He'll have, if he's back Sunday, I think 5 games, if my math is correct. So what are your thoughts on the rust factor here, rhythm, conditioning?
Yeah, it's always rest versus rust, right? And I think this rest will actually be good for him if he could get those 5 games under his belt. I think he'll also be eligible for all the awards, right? Which is important as well for him. So I like that. And I think he'll be fine going into the playoffs if he gets that amount of games. So it'll be good to see him back. The biggest thing is, defensively, how are they going to adjust with Cat and Brunson in the lineup together against some of these playoff teams? That's what I'm really looking at, and that's the adjustments that are going to fall on Tibbs. So I'm interested in seeing that. But when it comes to Jalen Brunson on offense, I have no worries at all, and I think the rest will actually be good for him.
Yeah, let's just go through it quickly. Cam Payne, Deuce McBride, Deuce groin injury, Cam ankle injury. James, do you see them returning by the end of the week? Do you see them practicing Friday?
Yeah, that's a great question. Tibbs told us that they're both very close. Cam actually went through his pregame routine yesterday in Cleveland, so that's a telling sign. I don't know if Deuce did, but he is on the trip. So it sounds like to me that they're both close. End of the week sounds about right for me, and if not, both of them for sure, one of them. But the fact that Cam went through his pregame routine in Cleveland, I think, is a significant news. But yeah, I think they're going to be close to full health for this final week of the regular season, if not at full strength.
Yeah, it's something we're all keeping an eye on, and we talked about Karl-Anthony Towns and the knee, and James hit on Towns not really saying much that raised anyone's eyebrows, but another injury to keep an eye on there. Something else that happened recently, Carmelo Anthony, according to ESPN, will be a first ballot Hall of Famer. Congratulations to Carmelo. I always thought it was coming, knew it was coming, but the way he carried himself to me throughout his tenure in New York, throughout some ups, a lot of downs, he always was there to be the face of that franchise, whether it was a season where you won 54 games, a season where you won 32 games. He was there through the ups and the downs, and it probably sounds a little bit hokey, but I'll always remember, he did so much off the court. It seemed like 5 times a year I was going to cover a charity event where he was putting major money and major resources behind whatever the event might have been. I mean, I always remember Hurricane Sandy. Obviously, the city got hit hard. I think the next 2 days later, Carmelo Anthony was down in housing projects in Red Hook with his brother Justice, and they had a big food truck, and they were handing out meals to people in need. And so he always made that a priority for him. And we all know, the scorer he is and one of the best scorers of his generation. So well deserved for Carmelo Anthony. We're going to hit now on the talkback. So that means we bring in my friend and yours, Matthew Spendley, the Big Spend, and he is going to relay some questions from you guys to us. Matt, how are you?
What's up, guys? How we doing? Have to hit the 3 to the dome for Melo and make sure I'm going back far enough so I can get it. I still catch myself doing it every game. I know our guy CP also comes out and does that every time. James, our guy, the Cooler, is asking, since we know you covered the Pistons for 7 years, and they are currently in the 5th seed. Obviously, Cade's been out for a little bit. I know he was doubtful last night and didn't play against the Thunder, but Detroit tanked to ensure a 3-6 matchup with the Knicks. So just a little curious, based on obviously your experience with both teams. I know Detroit has been a significantly different team this year than they were last year. How you would see that playoff matchup potentially playing out if that was to be the case?
I think the Pistons would make the New York Knicks sweat in a series. I think the Knicks win the series because of experience, and I don't think the Pistons, if the Pistons get blown out in any game, it's game 1 in the Garden for that Pistons team having that first experience, playing 1 playoff basketball and 2 in that environment. I think they would come back nicely in game 2. I'm not saying that they would win, but I think they would be able to shake off kind of the initial shock of it all. This Detroit Pistons team is a team that defends at one of the highest levels in basketball. I believe they're second in the NBA in defense since the All-Star break. They have one of the best defenders, 2 of the best defenders in basketball, for being honest, in Asar Thompson and Isaiah Stewart. Isaiah is one of the best rim protectors. I think it's safe to say he's the best rim protector in basketball. Cade is a top 5 player to me in the NBA this season. I think he should finish as a top 5 MVP candidate. They play hard. They play fast. And Malik Beasley is a guy that has given the Knicks trouble in the past. So if there is one inexperienced team that I think would not be rattled by their first playoff look and by playing in the Garden, I think it is that Detroit Pistons team. But I think the Pistons, I don't think they tank for 6. I think they're welcome to play any team that they want between them and Indiana. Now, I think Milwaukee tries hard to get the 5 seed and tries to play Indiana, and the Pistons and Bucks play against each other in games 81 and 82. So it could be very interesting.
Absolutely. Andrew, any thoughts on the Pistons, given that we've been talking about them a little bit?
I love the Pistons. I think Cade Cunningham would be the MVP of this league if there was nobody named Jokic in SGA. I think he's having a great season, 3-level scorer, plays both sides of the floor. Totally turned around this franchise, which was terrible last year. And people were, saying like he's not a winning player because he was on that team last year. And I was like barking at them. I was screaming at them like, really watch this guy play basketball. He could do everything on a basketball court.
He was very good last year.
Yes. No, all good. I totally agree. And people also went crazy when I said he's of the Luka LeBron mold. Is he as good as them? No. Does he have LeBron's athleticism? No. Is he a savant passer quite like Luka? No. But he's of that mold, and I love what he's doing, and I think he should be an All-NBA first-team player this year.
All right. You guys are on the record. All right, Ian, I want to ask you, I know something you talked to Kat about over the weekend, I believe, was just about the Knicks pick-and-roll coverage, and especially their defense. Sorry if you heard a buzzer. Somebody's trying to put something in my apartment. Their defense about if he's more comfortable defending a little more aggressively or in a drop coverage has been a big topic for the Knicks community this year. So Kat said that he's perfectly comfortable covering more aggressively and the Knicks can use their athletic traits. I think we know in the postseason we're going to learn about how Kat's defense will be. But I was curious what you thought about his response and why you decided to ask that question.
Yeah, I wanted to ask because there was a lot of talk about turning the ball over, Knicks being generally more aggressive defensively of late, and we were asking about that, I think, that particular night and the days preceding it. So I know the Knicks had kind of played both, right? They've played in drop, they've played with Cat back, they've switched it up, they've had him be more aggressive, play further up on the pick and roll, and I thought his answer was interesting because one way I took it was, hey, yeah, I like doing this, like, not telling the coaches what to do, but saying like, yeah, I'm comfortable. Like, we can do it. Let's keep doing it. And, you know, with the playoffs, such a chess match, and Tom Thibodeau, you know, has his guys prepared like a playoff game for every regular season game. So it only ramps up in the postseason. But I am curious to see how often they go drop coverage on pick and rolls or how often they ask their big man to get further up and to maybe have active hands and disrupt some things. It's going to be an interesting chess match, and that's why I wanted to ask Carl that question.
And we'll depend on the matchups too in the playoffs. So we'll see. All right, that's what I got, guys. Let me go answer my door.
Thank you, Mr. Spenley.
Thanks.
We got final thoughts here, fellas. We talked about the Pistons, but as of today, Knicks will be matched up against Milwaukee in the first round. Andrew, thoughts on that matchup?
They should win this one, and I think everybody's in big trouble if they don't with no Dame, right? Like, this is a series that they should win, and it'll be interesting to see because, yes, the Bucks have the best player on the court, but, you know, the Knicks offense has been elite at times this season. They have great defensive pieces when you look at Wingstop. So I think that they're just a better all-around team, even though the Bucks have the best player. But with no Dame for the Bucks, I'm totally expecting the Knicks to win that series if it happens.
James, what about you?
Yeah, I think the Knicks, if they're hoping and wishing, that's who they face. Because not only do I think that they handle the Bucks, and out of respect for Giannis, I do think the Bucks would win a game. But the way that Boston and Cleveland have handled the Knicks is the same way the Knicks have handled Milwaukee. It has not really been close. New York has really dominated teams with lumbering centers. They have the bodies to throw at Giannis. But why I think it's important is I do think the Knicks could win that series in 5. And I think it is important to try to get some rest before you play Boston. I do not think you want to go into a grinded out 6-7 game series against the Pistons and Pacers and then, oh, wait, here's Boston on the other end. Milwaukee gives you a little bit of time, I think. You'll get a couple days to rest and to get your mind right before just going into a big time series.
Yeah, it's interesting. The 5 games, 6 games, it all matters in the playoffs. And with respect to rest, that'll do it for us. I'm gonna let these guys rest. Andrew Salop, Combos Court, the show, the podcast. You can find it all over his social media. He's at Combos Court on Twitter. James Edwards, reporter, Knicks beat writer for The Athletic, does fantastic work. If you're not subscribed there, reading them, make sure you go and do that. And we will be back with you here on the Putback next week on Wednesday, April 9th. We look forward to seeing you then, and thanks for being with us.